Hi, IronHackers. My name is Marlene Proman, and I'm a PhD student at the Research Center of Open Digital Innovation. I have been trained in design, so I will be walking you through 3 tutorials that will introduce you to the foundations of design, especially web design. So let's get started. Best website usability is achieved by following user-centered design approach. That means that you focus on the end user and design your mashup for them. You can achieve website usability by combining design elements according to certain design principles that help you achieve what you aim for, and by adhering to usability heuristics. This first tutorial will introduce you to the basic design elements with which you can construct your mashups. So let's start with the basics. Visual design or graphic design is a creative process of generating visually unified compositions, i.e. designs. This is considered an art because there are many appropriate ways in which to organize the relationships between the design elements. The key is to achieve visual unity, which is perceived wholeness or oneness, whereby all elements in the design work together in unison. They work towards conveying the same message, the same emotional appeal, and etc. This perception of unity can be achieved by a variety of ways. It's kind of a spectrum between high harmony, where repetition of similar elements are commonly used to achieve symmetry, especially radial symmetry like flowers. And on the other end of the spectrum, we have variety, which leverages high levels of contrast and difference. In essence, design elements are used according to a variety of design principles, which are introduced in the next tutorial, to achieve a unifying composition anywhere across this dyad between harmony and variety. Like with most things in life, too much of anything is not good. Too much of harmony tends to be boring, yet too much of variety tends to lead to chaos, especially in the website context. Variety can help achieve emphasis and make people notice specific elements so that you can guide them through your website more effectively. Too much variety, however, can cause them to be confused and not know what to do or where to go in your website. So it's important to have a little bit of harmony and a little bit of variety. Harmony for ability to be able to use the website according to its function, and variety to be able to feel somewhat excited about being there and using the site. So this tutorial, as already indicated, will introduce you to the 6 predominantly accepted design elements. They are the components that make up any visual design, from packaging to web design to even architecture or magazine design. So these design elements include the line, the shape, the color, value, texture, and space. And they are all used strategically in design, and they can be expressed in a variety of ways so as to make the user see certain things, make likely interpretations, and have specific emotional responses. It is hereby assumed that you have gone through the presentation or the PowerPoint slides that have been provided to you before attending to this tutorial. If you have, then you're familiar with this interactive infographic, the poppy field. And we will use this as our learning platform. So in the presentation, you were given a screenshot of the poppy field and asked to identify design elements that make up the composition, and also reflect on how they are given particular styles to convey certain emotional feelings and etc. Here you see essentially the introduction on the website that explains and also gives you context to the visualization that is now launching in front of us. This is the screen that we will be evaluating today and using as our illustrative case. If you're interested, you can access the live project online on www.poppyfield.org. So, in essence, it's a poppy field where each poppy visualizes a war that has happened in this case Europe, and you can learn more about it. But we will focus on the visual elements. So let's start with a line. Imagine a dot moving through space that leaves behind a trajectory. That trajectory, that pathway that the dot created, is a line. A static definition for a line is that it's a length connecting two or more dots. Regardless of which definition you wish to adhere to, lines come in many shapes and forms. They can be long, short, straight or curved, horizontal or vertical. They can be solid, dashed, thick or thin, irregular, or combined with other elements. You can vary its weight, its style, its orientation, but with every decision you make, you give the line character and meaning. So let's look at orientation. Most notably, horizontal lines, as you can see here or here, they are parallel to the horizon and often appear static because they seem to be lying down as if they kind of fall over, even if they're floating in the middle of the composition. As such, they convey stability and security, while vertical lines are perpendicular to the horizon, and therefore they have the potential to be tilted over, unless they're very thick and bulky, as you can see in this example. The more bulkier they are, the more stable they seem. Diagonal lines are very different. They are unbalanced and dynamic. They have kinetic energy that is often used in design to destabilize the scene, to create tension, excitement, and convey motion. All of these seem to be as if a glass shattered and all the pieces are falling down. So let's look at our poppy field and identify some lines here. Obvious lines that we can notice are the ones that connect the ear to the poppies. They are vertical lines, they are thin lines, and they have a slight curve. So with that style, what is conveyed is that they are fragile and thin, they float in the wind, they don't seem particularly static, even though they are, but they're not structured or rigid. They have been given a relatively weak and fragile emotive feel, if you will, or character. Another obvious line is the timeline. Contrary, this one is horizontal, bold, and very static. It is further emphasized by the line being given a red fill, a red contour. It emphasizes it to the user. And its two handles, which are shapes, which we'll talk about shortly, these, given their position at the ends, they convey to us that we can control this timeline on this horizontal axis. Not on vertical, not diagonal, but on this horizontal axis. There are a number of other less obvious lines in this composition. Here you see two lines of text that can be seen as two parallel visual lines. The bottom is confined by a shape to give it a button kind of like look, but it is a line that is composed of essentially 4 different words, plus a line that conveys to us or signifies us a downward looking arrow, which this one is used to convey to us that we can interact and open a menu option from it. Another implied line is formed by aligning the continent toggle buttons one after the other. If they were scattered all over the place, then we would not see this implied line. But since they are all aligned, we can see an implied line. Similarly, but less obvious, are the X and Y axis of the decades and the duration of the wars. Despite the relatively vast gaps between one another, the axis values are aligned and similarly stylized so that they are perceived to belong to the same group, and therefore they convey to being as one scale, one implied line. Can you find one more implied line that I have not yet mentioned? What about this corner here? Yes, they're shapes, but individually these shapes are squares, so without any sense of direction really. Together, by them being aligned on top of each other, now we see a vertical orientation, an implied line. So this is how lines are constructed and used in this poppy field design. Now let's move on to the next element, the shape. Shapes can be created by enclosing a line, defining areas by color or values or value changes, or by using the edge to simply carve out a shape without actually drawing one. So here's an obvious example. Even though you have drawn all around, it's the edge that actually carves a ball or a shape out of negative space. A more obvious example here, even though the shape that is drawn is the mama bear, but it's the way the edge is carved, and by using one additional shape for the eye of the cup, you can actually see that there is also a baby bear. It's an implied shape. It is important to note that there are geometric rectilinear shapes, such as squares, triangles, circle, rhomb, and they are commonly man-made kind of items in our everyday life context. And then there are organic shapes that can be found in nature. Also, there are abstract shapes, whereby complex shapes, organic or man-made, are simplified into easier versions, such as the paw of an animal or a camera icon, right? All the excess detail has been omitted from these abstract shapes. So let's look at how shapes have been used in this poppy field design. So obvious ones are, of course, the poppies. But so they look like flowers, right? They have the heart, they have the kind of inner lines, which is often used, and then there are these pebbles, right? But when you look more closely, this is a compound shape. It's actually put together from many circles. It's just at the overlap, they reverse color each other out. So you can see the shape underneath. So this is just a computer graphic effect that has been used to create this transparency effect. But the shape in and of itself that has been used is the circle to make this poppy visualization. There are also shapes around the continents, which help us to perceive them not just words, but as buttons. And it helps that they have been colored. This helps draw our attention to them and perceive that potentially we can interact with them. These have been color coded with pebbles of the poppies. Though they're difficult to read, it is meant to trigger us to correlate that this one impacted all of the geographic regions, this particular war. Of course, it's difficult to make this the same interpretation in the smaller poppies, but that's a different point. So there are other shapes present in the design, like I mentioned before, the handles for the timeline. There's also a button that you can control the scale if it's normalized or not. The drawing out a shape around this drop-down menu button and the social media icons here. So shapes are used in a variety of ways to convey data, but also a lot of the interactive elements are conveyed by using shapes. Another crucial design element is color. This is one of the more impactful elements in design, as they have a lot of power to create different moods, to convey images, attract attention and guide user attention, identify objects, and in general to tell a story in a visual scene, such as a website. Every color conveys something different to people, and their combinations can affect what kind of impressions your users will take away from your website. Different colors are different hues that are defined by their wavelengths. Besides the variety of hues, each color has varying levels of value, i.e. the relative lightness or darkness, and each color in their full saturation is very bright. But you can dull the color down without losing its value. So here you have a kind of a 50% gray. So you can play with the saturation, i.e. the brightness versus dullness level of a color. But their value and saturation are not the same thing, because saturation preserves the same value across. So each of these values can have its own array of saturations. So let's look at the color wheel, which is one of the crucial tools in design. The three primary colors, the red, the blue, the yellow, are essentially what all other colors are mixed from. So all other colors are kind of a combination of these three. An important characteristic of hues is their perceived temperature. So warm colors such as the reds, the oranges, and the yellows are colors of fire, fall leaves, sunsets, sunrises, and so they reflect energy, passion, often happiness, enthusiasm, and positivity. Or fear, if you particularly live in California, where fires are known to cause a sense of fear. So color is culturally dependent. So be careful when using colors applied to other cultural contexts. And then we have the cold colors, the greens, the blues, the purples. These are more subdued. They are colors of the night, the nature. They carry calming, relaxing, and reserved effects. They are used to reflect calmness, sustainability, professionalism, rationality. Like Facebook uses blue, even though it's a social platform which oftentimes wants to be perceived as an exciting and etc. But spa websites oftentimes use cool colors rather than warms, whereas youth brand websites tend to want to be perceived as exciting and appeal to the teenage population. So they revert to warm colors more commonly. So think about how you use color in your mashups rather carefully. So colors can have variable levels of brightness or dullness. So here we have an example of a website that uses very bright, vibrant colors. And that contrast between those colors grabs our attention to the four shapes on this site, and away from the background images that is only there to provide us some context. On the contrary, here we have a website that uses very dull colors. So while pure colors are fully saturated and vivid, dull colors have a washed out effect, but they are often perceived of being softer, more nicer for the touch, whereas the high vibrancy of colors is very good for attracting attention and conveying energy. Now, the value, either relative lightness or darkness, is not the same as saturation, as explained earlier. There is an array of different values for every hue, and they are achieved by adding white or gray or black to the colors. So a tint of a hue is achieved by adding white to the color. A shade is achieved by adding gray to the hue, and black to the hue, and different tones are achieved by adding different grays to the hue. And value is used to create emphasis. So we are here. It's used clearly to split the website up into different sections, but it's also often used to create a perception of motion or depth. In general, the human eye is drawn to elements that have the highest contrast against its background. So here we are, darker shades are used to guide users to read the title of the site as we read from left to right. So let's look at the poppy field data visualization. One thing that obviously stands out is that it very monochromatically leverages warm red hues all across the page. There's no real cool colors, no greens, no blues, kind of a velvety, but really more of a shaded red. And as said in the introduction, if you paid attention, the red color is chosen partly because poppies are red oftentimes, although generically there are alternatives. But also red helps to convey the human relationship to war, its bloodiness, its loss of life, and etc. The use of bright versus dull reds is relatively limited in this design. However, there is one crucial way that it has been used. So it's between the background and the visual elements. So the background has been dulled down, even though it has tints of red in it, but it's very, very dull. And also the value is quite light. And this is to increase contrast to the data points and the crucial control elements, which is the timeline here and the location filters up here. An interesting design element, though increasingly less used in the web design context, is texture. There was a time when web did use to emulate the real world a lot more. Texture was then the primary means of communicating three-dimensionality and the tactile aspect of what is perceived. If something is soft or furry, hard or cold, rustic or soft to our tactile fingers. Today, with people getting much more used to web design and web platforms, much of web design is no longer needing to refer to the tactile feel, and much of today's web design is flat and without texture. But texture is not just a background photo, like here, of an elephant skin or blackboard, but it can also be more abstract or arbitrary. Like Here, texture is conveyed by the edge quality, same here, like a torn paper, or here. But and also in the style of the fonts that simulate the finish of some rustic feel or material. Texture is often used to add richness and depth, but most importantly, to build immersion into the visual scene. So here, texture is used to kind of convey depth by shading and giving a sense of three dimensionality. And texture generally seeks to emulate the tactile feelings of the real world. So let's look at our poppy field. This design, like most web designs these days, is flat and does not have much texture, but I would like to point out that the thin lines that have the power to to appear in front of the poppy flowers, they do overcast their effect and convey their fragile being and their delicate nature, making it seemingly feel like a threaded, delicate thing that you don't want to push too hard. So just by overlaying different elements, you can convey the a certain emotional response, which hereby is the delicate nature of these thin lines. Now, lastly, we'll talk about space, and space is really the framing or what brings it all together. So space can be positive and negative. So positive space refers to the actual objects here, the wood crosscut, here the lamp, the glasses, the title, and etc. Or the negative space, which here uniquely is centered. Here it's given around the glasses. So the negative space refers to the shapes that appear around and between those elements, i.e. the background. But it's important to recognize that both are needed in any and all design, as you cannot clutter the visual scene, because otherwise the objects you want the user to focus on will not be able to stand out. So it is the balance between positive and negative space that is used to guide our eyes, the user's eyes, to the important elements, while also giving our eyes the space to rest. So here, the color emphasis is used to focus our eyes on the line, whereas a lot of negative space is given to us so that we can calmly follow it without getting distracted. And space is foundational in providing order and helps designers make their goal and their message clear to their users. So let's look at the poppy field example. Obviously, there is a major negative space area between the dada, which is the poppies on their strings, and the area toggles. And this space is crucial for us to notice that the wars have grown longer over the years, and so we can see a trend line, an implied line that only emerges because we are given this free space that allows us to focus on this kind of trend line. Without the negative space, this would not be possible. And of course, notice the negative space all around the site. This is important to perceive the poppy field as a unified composition where nothing is hidden behind the edges. Here, social media buttons are kind of separated from the rest of the composition, and that's because topically it is not tied to the data and the topic of this, but rather a function separate. So that makes sense here. Yeah, so negative space again, important for the composition to feel complete and unified. So with this, we conclude the first tutorial on usability. In this video, we covered design elements. So now you have an overview of what they are and how you can use them. The next tutorial will introduce you to design principles, which gives you some idea on how you can create different kind of relationships between the design elements that you choose to use. And there's no right or wrong here. It's rather what is the outcome that you want to achieve. And then the last tutorial will focus on the user-centered design approach and how you can achieve usability, ease of use in your mashups. And with that, thanks for listening, and move on to the next tutorial on design principles. Thank you. Bye.